I went cave exploring with some friends. I'm the only one that survived. I used to think Mammoth Cave was just another adventure, a tick off our list. It was supposed to be fun, a weekend to explore the shadows with my best friends, to test our nerves in the endless dark. But somewhere down there, under miles of stone, something went wrong. Now, one of us is missing, and I swear, I can still hear him calling. We'd been going for hours, our voices echoing through the tunnels, each one mocking the confidence we had when we started. There was me, Sam, and my friends Luke, Jared, and Ben. Ben was always the daring one, the first to wander ahead, the one who'd get us into trouble just to laugh it off. But when he didn't come back, no one was laughing. It's strange. We retraced our steps, searched every crevice, calling his name until our voices scraped raw. Nothing. Just an endless silence, heavy and swallowing. And then, the faintest echo, like Ben's voice, drifting from somewhere deep in the shadows. Luke was the first to hear him calling. He stopped dead, his hand shooting up as we walked, telling us to listen. We froze, straining against the thick silence. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely louder than a breath. None of us had, but as we stood there, letting the silence settle around us, we heard it, a faint, distant call, almost swallowed by the stone around us. It was Ben's voice, unmistakably. He was calling out, the sound barely reaching us, but bouncing off the cave walls in strange, warped echoes. The direction was wrong, though. The call wasn't coming from where we'd last seen him, it was coming from one of the tunnels we hadn't even traveled down. But maybe, somehow, the paths were connected. It wasn't impossible for cave tunnels to intersect. We were probably about 2 miles down at this point, so deep that the silence felt alive, closing in around us. The chill in the air seeped into our bones, and every breath echoed back like a reminder of how far we'd come. The walls felt tighter here, the space around us shrinking with each step. Our lights cast shaky beams on the rough stone, cutting through just enough darkness to keep us moving. We packed extra batteries, sure, but even with the supplies, an uneasy feeling twisted in my gut. Still, leaving wasn't an option. Ben was down there somewhere, and we couldn't just abandon him in the dark. We walked down a few hundred feet, calling out Ben's name into the dark, then waiting in silence, hoping for any kind of response. The cave swallowed our voices, leaving only the faint drip of water somewhere far off. Then, after what felt like ages, we heard him. It came from behind us. "What the fuck?" Luke whispered, his voice tight and shaky, eyes darting back toward the path we'd just covered. Jared, louder than any of us, shouted back, "All right, Ben, you can stop messing with us now, man. This isn't funny, bro." I wanted to believe it, that Ben was just messing with us, hiding in some shadowed nook and waiting to jump out. But as I stared into the empty tunnel behind us, a chill crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, it wasn't really Ben. We backtracked, our lights slicing through the shadows as we searched every inch of the area. We moved slowly, scouring every nook, every crack in the walls, but there wasn't a single trace of Ben. Not a footprint, not even a scuff mark. He was just gone. Eventually, we returned to the central cavern, slumping down on the cold stone to catch our breath and regroup. I told the others what had been gnawing at me, the dread curling around my thoughts. But Luke was quick to brush it off. "Oh, come on, man, you know Ben is just fucking with us," he said, his tone forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Well, how did he end up back here, then, when he was down there before? I shot back. I'm telling you guys, something isn't right. Before anyone could answer, Ben's voice echoed again, faint but unmistakable. This time, it came from the tunnel we'd seen him go down first. Come on, guys, this way. His voice drifted down the rocky corridors, a lazy drawl that somehow felt wrong. Jared sprang to his feet, shouting down the tunnel, "Screw you, Ben. When I see you, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you." Then, we heard it, a low, chuckling laugh, the sound echoing, but from a completely different tunnel. Luke and Jared exchanged glances, the bravado draining from their faces. It was like the air had thickened, and now they felt it too. Something was off. A chill crept over all of us, settling in our bones as Ben's laughter faded into the shadows. We huddled together, whispering hurriedly about what to do. The idea of leaving came up quick, but Luke shut it down fast. "We can't just leave Ben down here, guys," he insisted, voice firm but edged with unease. Jared shook his head, glancing toward the distant exit. "I'm going. I'll call the cops and tell them our friend's missing. I'll come back with a search party." It wasn't a bad idea, honestly. Part of me felt relief at the thought of professionals with equipment and experience. But Luke wouldn't budge, his jaw set, determination in his eyes. He wanted to keep looking, convinced that Ben was close, just around the next corner. Jared didn't wait for more argument. With a last look back, he took off down the path toward the exit, his flashlight bouncing along the walls until he was out of sight. Luke and I stood there in silence, the weight of the decision hanging heavy between us. Eventually, we decided to search a little longer. Just a little longer, we told ourselves. After Jared disappeared from sight, Luke and I ventured down the same tunnel Ben had vanished into. We called out, voices barely steady, and after a moment, Ben's voice drifted back, faint and distorted, like it was caught in a slow echo. The sound seeped out of a dark, narrow crevice ahead, just wide enough for us to squeeze through. We moved cautiously, each step slower than the last, feeling a prickling sensation on our necks, like unseen eyes were watching us from the shadows. The path bent sharply to the right, creating the illusion that it might loop back toward one of the other tunnels. Luke forced a chuckle. "See? He's just messing with us." But as we rounded the corner, our lights caught something that made us stop dead. A jagged hole yawned open in the middle of the path, wide and deep, cutting off the tunnel. The space was too narrow to walk side by side, so I trailed behind Luke as he edged forward and aimed his flashlight down into the darkness below. Luke went silent, his light fixed on something I couldn't see. I waited, the quiet pressing in, until the tension grew unbearable. "What is it?" I whispered, trying to peer around him. When he turned to me, his face was drained of color, eyes wide, lips parted like he couldn't quite find the words. He swallowed, barely managing to get it out. "He's down there," Luke said, his voice trembling. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I stammered, heart pounding against my ribs. "He's down there, Sam," Luke whispered, voice cracking. "Dead." The words hit me like a punch. I stood there, numb with disbelief, until Luke grabbed my arm, his grip almost painful. "We have to get out of here," he said, voice tight with terror. Without another word, we turned and started back, moving fast but steady, our lights casting frantic beams along the rough stone walls. As we reached the tunnel that led back to the central cavern, another voice echoed through the darkness. "Guys!" Neither of us paused. We broke into a sprint, feet pounding against the ground, breaths ragged with panic. We didn't care where it was coming from, we just wanted out. In his haste, Luke stumbled over a jagged rock and fell hard, his flashlight skidding across the ground before shattering into pieces. I stopped, reaching down to pull him up, my light sweeping the walls as I moved. And that's when I saw it, a figure, pale and naked, crouched at the far end of the tunnel, watching us with hollow, empty eyes. It looked almost human, but something was horribly, horribly wrong. "Oh my God," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper, trembling as I stared at the figure. Luke turned, catching sight of it, his face twisting in terror. He grabbed my arm, jolting me out of my daze. "Come on, Sam," he urged, pulling me forward. We didn't look back, rushing through the darkness, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever that thing was. Every shadow felt like it was closing in on us, every echo stretching our nerves tighter. As we reached the main tunnel that led out of the cave, we saw a figure lying on the ground ahead. Jared. He was sprawled face down, motionless, his flashlight lying a few feet away, casting an eerie glow on the stone. "Oh God," I breathed, heart racing as we knelt beside him. He must have tripped, maybe knocked himself out in his rush to get out. But when we turned him over, the breath left my lungs. His face was unrecognizable, crushed and bloody, as if something had beaten him down, over and over. The horror of it froze us in place, and I could barely think, only feel the cold grip of fear sinking deeper into my bones. That's when we heard it, a voice drifting from the shadows, but this time, it wasn't Ben's. It was Jared's. "Come on, guys, this way," the voice called, soft and taunting. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, heart hammering, and there it was, standing just beyond the light's reach. Pale, humanoid, but wrong in every way. Its skin was chalky, almost luminescent under the beam, and its eyes, solid black, empty and endless. The thing stared at us for a moment, then turned, its movements jerky and unnatural, and ran down the tunnel, laughing in Jared's voice, a sick, twisted echo of the friend we'd known. "What the hell?" Luke whispered, voice barely audible over my own pounding heart. He grabbed my arm, his grip trembling. "We have to get out of here, man." I didn't need any convincing. We bolted, feet slamming against the stone, the darkness stretching ahead of us like a maw, ready to swallow us whole. As we ran, the creature's footsteps echoed close behind, its pace relentless. My heart pounded, my breaths coming in ragged gasps as we pushed forward. Suddenly, Luke stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. I skidded to a stop, spinning around, and that's when I saw it. The creature had caught up to him, gripping his leg and starting to drag him back into the shadows. Luke clawed at the ground, his face contorted in terror. Without thinking, I shone my flashlight directly on it, and as the beam hit, the creature shrank back, raising its long, bony arms to shield its huge black eyes. It couldn't stay in the light, that much was clear. I stepped toward Luke, light fixed on the creature as it hissed and retreated, slipping back into the pitch-black depths of the cave. We backed away slowly, both of us trembling, the silence around us settling like a heavy weight. We kept moving, trying to keep our steps steady, though every nerve in our bodies screamed to run. Luke fumbled in his bag, pulling out his spare flashlight, and now, with both beams cutting through the shadows, we scanned every crevice, every dark corner around us. The creature was silent now, but its presence clung to us, a feeling so thick it was hard to breathe. We both knew it was still near, lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting. Minutes stretched on, each one more suffocating than the last. But then, just as panic threatened to take over, we saw it, the cave entrance, a sliver of remaining daylight spilling in, piercing through the darkness like a lifeline. It was so close, a beacon of hope after the nightmare that had nearly swallowed us whole. We made it, or at least, we thought we did. Step by step, we edged closer to the exit, the sunlight drawing us in, so close I could almost feel its warmth. But just as we reached the final stretch, the creature dropped down from above, a blur of pale skin and black eyes, crashing into Luke and sending him sprawling to the ground. I whipped around, frantically aiming my light, but it was too late. In an instant, the creature pinned him down, smashing his head against the stone with brutal force. Paralyzed for a split second, my mind screamed at me to act, to do something. But instinct took over. I turned and ran, abandoning Luke's final, muffled cries, leaving my friend behind. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision as I pushed myself forward, barely seeing the light ahead. When I finally burst out of the cave into the fading daylight, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, chest heaving, and the weight of loss crashing over me. The tears came hard, unstoppable, as I lay there, shattered, knowing I was the only one who'd made it out. As I forced myself to stand, steadying my breath, I heard it, Luke's voice, faint and choked with fear, calling out from the depths of the cave. "Sam, please, help me." I froze, every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, to remember what I'd seen, to remember that Luke was gone. But hearing his voice, broken and desperate, twisted my insides. The guilt clawed at me, sharper than any fear. I had left him. I had abandoned him. The pleading continued, soft but relentless, each word pulling at the frayed edges of my sanity. Some part of me wanted to turn back, to run into the dark, convinced he was waiting, that I could still save him. But another part, a colder, darker part, knew the truth. It wasn't Luke. It was the creature, mimicking his voice, sinking its claws into the last threads of hope I had left. And yet, what if, somehow, it really was him? The thought tore at me, leaving me stranded there, helpless and shattered, unable to move forward or look back. Finally, I forced myself to turn away from the cave, each step heavier than the last. I had to leave. I had to get out and tell someone what had happened, no matter how impossible it all seemed. But as I reached the edge of the forest, the realization settled in, I couldn't tell them the truth. They'd never believe me. No one would. I could already picture the looks of doubt, the whispers, the judgment. So I rehearsed the lie as I stumbled into town, every word twisting in my throat. I told them we were stalked by someone in the cave. That he'd ambushed us, attacked Jared and Luke. I described a faceless killer lurking in the dark, hunting us down one by one. It was easier that way, easier than trying to explain the unexplainable. They listened, and they wrote it all down, but even as I spoke, a chill ran through me. In the back of my mind, Luke's voice still echoed, pleading, calling me back into the dark. The cops didn't let it go. They pressed me for hours, asking the same questions over and over, watching my every reaction. Soon enough, they began talking to my friends and family, probing into my relationship with the group. I could see it in their eyes. They suspected me. I was the last one out, the only one who'd made it back, and my story didn't add up. They searched the cave for days, combing through every passage, every cavern. Eventually, they found Ben's body, crumpled at the bottom of that pit, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. But Luke and Jared, they were gone. Their remains were never recovered. And now, when I close my eyes, I still see the darkness of that cave, hear the echo of their voices, distant and pleading. No one believes me. And maybe, after all this, I'm not sure I even believe myself. The only thing I know for certain is that I'll never step foot in another cave for as long as I live. The thought alone makes my skin crawl, my heart race. The darkness isn't just unsettling to me now, it's a living, breathing terror, wrapping itself around every corner, every shadow. I'm afraid of the dark in ways I never imagined, paranoia gnawing at me every time I turn off a light. Even here, in my own home, I can feel it, the creature's gaze, lurking just beyond the glow of my lamp, hidden in the pockets of darkness, patient and unyielding. It's waiting for me. I can feel it, lurking, watching, waiting for that one moment when I'm left alone in the dark. And I know, deep down, that it won't stop until it pulls me back into the shadows, just like it did with them. I was stalked through shopping lists. Until a couple of days ago, I was certain cell phones saved my life. Back in the before times, I'm bringing out my old man voice here, we wrote so many things on paper, quick notes, directions, addresses, and most of all, shopping lists. When used up, they mostly made it in the garbage bins since those were on many street corners. Even with the bins everywhere, some of these papers ended up on the ground. Sometimes they slipped out of our purses and pockets, other times they just missed the garbage. There these papers would lie until a good Samaritan picked them up for garbage, or folks like my friend, Jay, and I picked them up. Jay and I enjoyed collecting these scraps of paper. We loved figuring out the stories about the hidden lives of the people all around us through the hints in these pieces of paper. We were fascinated to see what things people were buying. Sometimes you would find a common theme around the list: tomatoes, bell peppers, Italian seasoning, noodles. The person is planning an Italian meal, bread, lunch meat, cheese, juice, nuts, someone planning their lunches. The fun ones had stars or underlined items emphasized, something that set those lists apart from all the rest. If we were really lucky, my friend and I would find a short note or letter instead of the shopping lists. Go near a school and you'd be more likely to find this special mom note: "Love you, honey. Have a great day at school." Maybe it had the rare dad note: "You can never go hungry at a magical beach, not with all the sandwiches around." These notes, though, could appear anywhere. It was the special notes that we found just wandering the city that had the special appeal to us. For the two of us, this became a joyful hobby. Lots of scraps of paper that we pick up and eventually recycle, so we were saving the planet as well. It was harmless fun. Until it wasn't. I still have the piece of paper that started everything off. Below is everything it says. March 15th, 05 groceries. Sodas. Waters. Powerade. Pizza. Pasta dinner. Lasagna, party next week. Chips, party next week. Salsa, party next week. Tomatoes. Peppers. Cayenne. I see you picking these up. I called my friend with the paper in my hand. J. Just found this on the ground. That's a cool one. Yeah, cool. With just a quick phrase, we blew this off as just a list with a special note and moved on. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from Jay. "So, Maybe that wasn't just a cool note after all. Huh? That "I see you picking these up" note. Yeah, I don't think that was just a cool note. I found one too. Starts out with a shopping list. But then it ended with "I see you picking these up" also. Jay and I got together and compared the shopping lists. The handwriting on the items was the same on each slip of paper. The handwriting at the bottom was the same on both slips of paper too, but different from the handwriting of the items. While technically we were invading the privacy of others, especially when those weren't shopping lists lying on the ground, we were also picking up trash in public spaces. This was the private lives folks didn't mind leaving around town, or maybe it slipped out of their pockets, but still, in the public space. These messages seemed directed, like an invasion of our privacy. What do you think these mean? I shrugged. I guess we have our own special note now. Jay's voice, if my memory is correct, lifted at the end of the sentence. I guess so. Not sure I want it. Me neither. Through the next weeks, we could see the effects of the cell phone's advancement. Cheaper and cheaper phones had cameras and texting was easier, so paper was less necessary. Still, we found some slips here and there. There was nothing out of the ordinary on those slips. Not until the middle of the summer. It says, "Why are you still picking these up?" You got that one too? Yeah. Are we doing anything wrong? Wrong? What is wrong about picking up paper? We're cleaning up the sidewalk at the very least. Right, right. December of 2005. The loose paper is harder to find, but every slip now comes with a message from this thing that's following us. Ha! Cleaning the planet. Whatever you say. This is what you had for dinner last night. You too have predictable patterns. More details slipped into the notes. Whatever was leading them could hear and see us. It commented on our clothing, our meals, even our sleep. The stalking became more obvious with the last few slips that we found. Watched you snooze your alarm twice. I have a knife. Do you recognize these? And some squares of our clothing. The last slip we ever found happened when my friend and I were out together. We passed a school and a piece of paper was lying on the sidewalk. We looked at each other and debated on picking it up. On the one hand, the possibility of a guardian's note the prize finds. On the other hand, we didn't want to know what the bottom would say. The wind picked up a little and one of us stepped on the paper so it wouldn't blow away. I guess that means we're picking it up. This slip of paper was only a special message to us. This time, the coloring was off, a dried rust color. The message was, "I'm watching you right now." We ripped up the paper and found the nearest trash can. Jay and I took any of the papers we hadn't yet recycled and we quickly made plans to burn them all, especially those with the strange directed notes. We created a bonfire on the night of a full moon. We threw whatever spices and plants we could find into the fire between notes. Jay and I knew nothing, still don't know anything, about demonology and exorcisms. We just knew we needed a little nature and something cleansing between the notes. My friend and I hoped this would be the end of everything. 2007 brought the advent of the iPhone. With that, the slips of paper were done. I hadn't thought about these messages or the time my friend and I had this hobby for a while now. Except I found a piece of paper in front of my car at a parking lot. It was flipped written side up and all it said was, "I'm still watching you. Don't listen to the music of DJ Eric Zan." I need to find DJ Eric Zan. Or, more specifically, the DJ formerly known as Eric Zan. He's changed his name, his Spotify and YouTube, all his socials have been nuked. He's definitely left New York. But he's out there somewhere, making more of his strange, desynchronous, yet hypnotic music. Building a new fan base. Luring them in, before, well, a repeat of what happened at the in Bushwick. 29 people dead. An electrical fire, the investigators claimed. Faulty wiring. You know how it is with these poorly maintained, converted warehouses. A fire, the local news repeated. Fire was the story they were sticking to. If anyone from the FBI or the CIA or any shadowy X-Files agency knows any better, they aren't saying anything at all. A bartender buddy of mine, Andy, recommended me for the DJ Eric Zan gig. "Dude, you up to work a concert in Bushwick?" He'd texted me. "A guy called last night, said he found my business card. But I'm already booked on the Lower East Side. Pays $100 for the night, plus tips. Really small gig, shouldn't be much work." I said I'd do it. I recognized the address. The was an old warehouse at the ascent of Bushwick, wedged into a corner between the Queens County border and the cemetery, surrounded by other abandoned warehouses tagged up, with metal-roofed awnings and those huge roll-up doors you see on industrial properties. The owners had rewired and redesigned the inside to be rented out for art shows, concerts, and club nights. Andy sent me a photo of the event's promotional flyer. It was shiny black, with a childlike drawing of a stick-figure girl leading a huge, fluffy monster on a leash. The design appeared cute at first glance, but the longer you looked at it, the more disturbing it became. The monster's crudely drawn human face was too large for its body. Its toothy mouth seemed less a friendly smile than a threatening sneer. DJ Eric Zan. 10 p.m. I spent some time internet stalking DJ Eric Zan. The guy played up the mystique, for sure. I found only one photo of the DJ himself, and it wasn't a particularly revealing one. Just a man, in a Cthulhu mask and turtleneck, standing behind a soundboard, with long sleeves and gloves on his hands. I clicked into his YouTube. DJ Eric Zan, the profile read. "We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity." H.P. Lovecraft. He'd also stolen his stage name from an H.P. Lovecraft story. Adorable. I hit play on a video titled Asenath number 14. 25K views, 1,500 likes, comments disabled. The music started slow and low, pounding bass over a hazy, barely perceptible electronic rumble. On the video screen, against an empty background, bits of white light swirled and exploded and pulled back together, then split into pulsating stars and primary colors. A trilling instrumental melody stretched over the repetitive bass line, rising and falling and shooting off into a million different directions, as the colorful stars on screen spun like pinwheels, light blending and shifting and modulating, before a frenetic piping overcame the instrumental tapestry. Wow! 50% off. Bill's Better second-hand furniture post-Labor Day sale. I muted my laptop as an ad replaced the hypnotic EDM melody. Asenath number 14 had been really short. Except, it wasn't. Asenath number 14 was 33 minutes, 45 seconds long. I frowned. No way I'd listened to that song for over a half an hour. I called the number Andy gave me, no one picked up. So, around 8:30, I walked from the train station to the down an alley to the back parking lot and employee entrance. There was clearly something going on. I could hear the thud, thud, thud of electronic bass. But, unlike every other time I'd worked the venue, there were no roadies trudging in and out with heavy equipment. There were no people around at all. No cars in the back parking lot either, except for one camper van. That, in and of itself, wouldn't be surprising. Plenty of touring musicians live out of vans. But this one was odd because it was completely blacked out. I'm not talking about tinted windows. Someone had taken the effort to cover every spot where light might seep through with opaque, dull black material. Assholes committed to the aesthetic, I thought. Even stranger, the rolling door of the loading dock was still closed and locked. As was the employee door. There was a handwritten sign posted there, absolutely no entry until 10 p.m. My next thought was the one that, in a roundabout way, saved my life. It went, screw that, upside down, backwards, and sideways. The promo flyers said the event started at 10 o'clock. Which meant, the moron who'd posted the sign assumed I'd be able to set up a full bar while dealing with a line full of guests wanting to get liquored up before the show. Lucky for me, I'd poured wine at a gallery pop-up at the 2 weekends before. And I'd forgotten to return the key. The way the is set up, the bar is in a separate, smaller backroom, connected to the showroom by a squat hallway. The employee door opened into the backroom, where I found my crates of liquor already deposited on top of the bar. The throbbing bass line I'd heard outside emanated from the showroom, rhythmic and looping. I saw moving shadows. I assumed the tech guys were all in there. I got to work organizing bottles as the last of the summer evening light faded to darkness, bass booming in my head, guiding my movements like a conductor. An hour later, I had to pee. I didn't want to annoy the roadies, or piss off whoever didn't want me in the before 10, but the venue's only bathrooms were in the showroom, and the building was isolated amongst a sea of empty warehouses, and my only other option was to whip it out in the parking lot. So I went. At the end of the hallway, I froze. There were figures setting up the stage, but they weren't roadies. They were pitch-black automatons shaped like naked, featureless, sexless humans, mannequins at the mall become animate. Their skin looked the consistency of clay. They moved fluidly, more organic than robotic. There were 6 of them. Each had arms and legs and, in lieu of a head, a cube-shaped protuberance emitting small peals of gray smoke as they lifted crates of lights and arranged amps on the main stage. I yelped. I backpedaled. My foot caught on something. I stumbled, a weight gave way, and the music stopped. I realized the looped bass line had come from a laptop, plugged in on the floor. I'd tripped over it. I'd hit a button or two. I'd killed the music. Slam. Crash. Metal framing was dropped. The soundboard hit the elevated stage with a hollow thud. Everything the clay-like, pitch-black, humanoid roadies had been carrying fell to the ground. As the roadies themselves melted, like butter in a pan, into gelatinous black puddles. After the incident after that night, I scoured the internet for people who knew DJ Eric Zan. People who could explain to me who he actually was. Or who he'd been before he was DJ Eric Zan. He kinda just appeared on Spotify in 2021, one Redditor wrote. I thought he was an AI, said another. Didn't he die in a fire at his concert in Brooklyn? Asked yet another. I dunno, maybe start there? His family must have said something. His family, if they existed, hadn't uttered a word. I'd scoured the internet for an actual photograph of DJ Eric Zan, or even a recording of his voice, and came up with nothing. Finally, user Greg87 direct messaged me. DJ Eric Zan was my roommate, he wrote. I'll be in NYC next week for Tech Week. I can tell you everything. Greg87 is a real guy, with a real name and a family and a life in Pasadena, California. But for privacy purposes, I'll refer to him here as, simply, Greg. Greg is an aerospace engineer with a master's degree. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Williamsburg. He'd known DJ Eric Zan while they were both college students in the late 2000s. James Hadley, Greg told me. That's his real name. James Hadley and Greg shared a Pasadena apartment, a few blocks from the university they both attended during Greg's senior year of college. James, though a year younger, was already 3 years into a PhD program in theoretical physics. Their residential situation had been arranged by University Student Services for half a semester. Greg said it felt more like living with a skittish cat than another young adult. James spent every minute he wasn't on campus barricaded in his room, working through equations or practicing his electric violin with headphones in. Whenever he inadvertently found himself in the same room with Greg, he'd lower his eyes and scurry away like a cockroach in the light. Greg felt sorry for him. He made it his mission to befriend his reclusive roommate, approaching the task as one would set about domesticating a feral pet. Greg stopped studying in his room. Instead, he'd arrange himself on the couch in the common room, hook his laptop to the TV, and play old Star Trek episodes as background noise. On the rare occasion James emerged from his room, Greg would invite him to sit and watch. At first, James might linger for a few minutes. Then, he started sitting down beside Greg. Finally, after a month of warming up, he brought own work into the common room so they could study together. When that became comfortable, James, at long last, began to speak. It was school stuff, at first, Greg told me. His area was string theory unification, universe building stuff, the interchange between particle physics and a potential tapestry of infinite planes. I'm not even sure I can explain it correctly. Eventually, though, I got him to open up about his life outside his research. You know, his family. James Hadley had been the beloved only child of successful parents. When they realized their 7-year-old could solve advanced algebraic equations and play Mozart on the violin, they lobbied James's small private academy to skip him from 2nd grade to 7th. He excelled both academically and musically, but his relationship with other children was a source of anxiety. The bigger boys in the neighborhood bullied him for being weird, while his preteen classmates treated him as more spectacle than friend. Finally, his parents pulled him out of school altogether. His mother, a professor at Cal State LA's School of Education, taught him at home until, age 13, James was accepted into a prestigious university. His mom and dad switched off driving him to and from college, even after he finished undergrad and began his PhD coursework, until that year. That year, his parents both died, his mother, in March, after a long battle with breast cancer, his father, in July, from a sudden heart attack. Without them, James felt alone in the world. They weren't just family, they'd been his cheerleaders, his most enthusiastic supporters, his only friends. I don't know how to live in society, James admitted to Greg. I want friends my own age. I want to go to parties, to socialize, to find my people. I just can't. How about music? Greg asked him. Maybe try and find a band to play with. James took that advice to heart. He bought himself a guitar and practiced in garages with stoners he met on Craigslist. But it wasn't a fit. The guy wasn't built to be a rocker. He was too self-conscious, too anal, a black hole of charisma. Then, Greg had an epiphany. Electronic music was still relatively niche then, still geeky. James was intrigued. A cousin of Greg's bought Pro Tools to mess with as a hobby, then lost interest. Greg convinced him to sell his entire setup to James at a discount. As a DJ, he could play a character, Greg explained. He could venture out into the world, be the life of the party, surround himself with people without bursting his bubble. And it worked. It worked better than Greg could have ever imagined. James, a musical prodigy with technical skills, took to Pro Tools like a duck to water. The ability to produce sounds no human voice or human hands could produce, for him, was the purest form of creation. His music blended sounds and rhythms together that shouldn't have mixed, yet did, into hypnotic harmonies that transfixed listeners. Greg connected him to high school buddies at other LA universities. Soon, James had built a small following and a solid side hustle as a frat party entertainer. He went through a few names: DJ Schradinger, Starboy XJH, Majorana Fermion. It should have stayed that way, Greg said wistfully. I thought he was happy. But James always wanted more. One night, Greg was out studying at a friend's house when he got a text from James. Come home now, the text read, with 20 exclamation points. Greg did as he was told. When he arrived, he found his usually restrained roommate bouncing around like an excited puppy. You have to see this, he exclaimed, dragging Greg into his room and shutting the door. He turned out the lights, typed a few keys on his computer, and closed his eyes as music flowed forth. There was a recorder, piping over a string quartet, over a brass band, over a bass line that sounded like a train approaching, Greg said. I thought I heard screaming cats in there somewhere, too. All the different melodies came together, then broke apart, then curved. Can music curve? Mesmerized, Greg eventually realized he was no longer in James's room. They were outside. He felt the warm air against his face on an alien planet with a rich maroon sky. Obsidian-black tundra stretched forever into the distance on all sides, dotted with throbbing golden orbs emitting the feeling of rough sandpaper. James stood there with him and, before them, a black swamp bubbled. Tar-like globules crawled out. Like snakes to a snake charmer, or flowers to the sun, they reached with wormy black tendrils towards the music and began to sway in time with the rhythm. I don't know how long it lasted, Greg said. Time meant nothing. Then, I was back in James's room, balled up on the floor. As soon as the room stopped spinning and Greg regained his ability to speak, he demanded James tell him what he'd done to them. James grinned from ear to ear. The promise of string theory, he said. I manipulated matter with my music. I changed our vibrations. I took us to another dimension. Shit, James, Greg stammered. What if we couldn't get back? Or if we got hurt or something? James smiled wider. You don't need to worry about that. We're ghosts there. Nothing could touch us. Greg had to admit, the experience of transporting himself to another dimension through music had been cool. Soon, James incorporated interdimensional tourism into his live sets. He conjured up bubbly pink jungles with cute flying felines, or forests full of multicolored plants and bugs that resembled the drawings of sugar-high kindergartners, or stark rocky seashores where blood-red waves met a blanket of thick, blue snow. He gained himself a reputation amongst Southern California sorority girls and underground EDM fans as the DJ whose music could generate hallucinations without drugs. James should have been happy. Yet still, he wasn't satisfied. On a rainy winter night, Greg returned home late. He heard violin music emanating from James's room. The song was fast and frenetic, jumping around from high octaves to low, jarring and nerve-rattling. Tired and annoyed, Greg went straight to James's room and shoved open the door. Lights flashed from his computer, which James was connected to via his headphones. Acoustic violin at his chin, James's hands danced like dying spiders, racing up and down the neck of the instrument. His eyes stared straight ahead, bloodshot and unthinking. On his face, an expression of unspeakable pain and horror. Greg ran to him and pulled off his headphones, accidentally dislodging them from their jack in the process. Music, the music that had driven his roommate to his current state, filled the room. And Greg felt himself tug violently into James's nightmare. They were trapped in an endless cave, illuminated only by a greenish glow. Metallic spikes, jagged stalagmites, covered the walls and ceiling and floor, jutting out as though to impale prey. A milky white substance, the consistency of glue, moistened the spikes like saliva. A gray thing lurked behind James. A faceless man, made of gray liquid steel. Bubbling and dripping and recongealing, its arms wrapped around his waist, leaving his arms free to fiddle like a madman. It bent its hulking form, head over James's head, lips locked to his temple as though it were drinking him. Greg froze, so disturbed by the liquid steel monster he didn't immediately notice the small creature sniffing at his feet. It was a thing the size of a puppy and the shape of a hamster, resembling a sentient steel wool sponge. It opened a mouth, much too large, and flashed dripping gray teeth like the surrounding stalagmites. It stared up at Greg with gelatinous yellow eyes. Then, the world spun. Everything went black. Greg woke sometime later, sprawled on the floor of James's room, behind his desk, surrounded by silence. A trickle of blood dripped down his forehead. He pulled himself to his knees and fell against the wall, eyes clenched shut, grasping for a timeline. James got stuck in another dimension. Greg heard the music, he went there too. They were supposed to be ghosts, nothing was supposed to touch them. But something did, a creature of molten metal, and it attached itself to James. Greg passed out. As he fell, his body slammed against James's computer, cutting the music and launching them back into their appropriate reality. James. Where was James? Greg forced his eyes open. James lay on the ground near him, breath shallow, eyes wide and distant. Greg crawled to him. James's lips moved. 1,000, he muttered. 1,000. 1,000. Then he fell quiet, and his eyes finally closed. Greg couldn't wake his roommate. He dragged him to bed, wrapped him in blankets, and watched him for hours, terrified he'd stop breathing. Finally, exhausted, Greg fell asleep in James's desk chair. When he awoke the next morning, James was gone. He found his roommate in the kitchen, brewing a pot of coffee, smiling. "What the heck, James?" Greg stammered. "Last night, what was that?" James eyed Greg strangely. Nothing happened last night?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." Greg gaped. He reached up and felt the welt over his eye, scraped off dried blood, just to remind himself he hadn't dreamed the entire thing. "Your violin playing," he insisted. "The cave with all the spikes. The metallic lava man eating you. The steel wool guinea pig? You don't remember any of this?" James shrugged. "Get a therapist, man. I think you're hallucinating." As he turned his back, Greg saw an odd mark on James's neck. A bruise the size of a hickey. Gray and shiny, like a smudge of silver metallic paint. After that day, James became a different person. Wallflower James, who lived in sweats and anime t-shirts, began wearing polos and styling his dirty blonde hair. Shy James, all of a sudden, attracted an entourage of frat boys who'd carry his DJ equipment and chill with him at dive bars. James, who'd previously spent his free nights reading pulp sci-fi and commenting on classical violin blogs, cultivated a Facebook wall full of photos from drunken club nights, his arms draped around inebriated girls and short dresses. Virgin James, who couldn't look a woman in the eye without blushing, now texted Greg 3 times a week to stay out of the apartment because James would be occupied there with a one-night playmate. "I should have been supportive, I guess," Greg admitted. "I'd been trying to lure him out of his comfort zone. But that cocky womanizer with bottle service, he wasn't James." It was nearly May by then, and Greg had been accepted into MIT for a master's program. He'd also begun dating his future wife. With finals looming and his roommate inflicted with douchebag brainworms, he was more than happy to spend his days in the library and his nights with his girlfriend. "I'd basically moved out already," he said. Then, he sighed. "A professor of mine lent me a book, and I'd forgotten about it. I wanted to return it before the school year ended." Determined to collect the borrowed book, Greg reluctantly returned to the apartment he shared with James for the last time, he promised himself. But as he approached the door, he felt and heard the familiar rumbling of an EDM bass line. "Great," Greg thought. "He must have a lady friend over." To save himself from an unsolicited porn soundtrack, he hooked his earphones up to his iPod and blasted 90s hip-hop as he unlocked the door. Quick as he could, he located the book under a pile of menus, then did a round of the common space, picking up random odds and ends he didn't want to leave behind. Then, "Party Up" by DMX was interrupted by a woman's scream. Greg acted on instinct. He ran to James's room and forced his way through the locked door. In the process, his earphones were torn from his ears. And James's music dragged him, kicking and screaming, into oblivion. He was back in the subterranean cave with jagged spikes and the ghostly greenish glow. The spikes, ever so slowly, moved. Curled and extended, refracting the hazy green light into colors and shades Greg couldn't describe with words. The milky white glue substance extended from spike to spike like a spiderweb, dripping down in thick globules. And James was there. He stood stock still, the faceless gray liquid steel man behind him. Embracing him. Moist, metallic tentacles wrapped around his arms and legs and torso, gripping his neck and face like long-fingered hands. Bleeding into his skin. Enveloping him, like a defective superhero suit. The gray man was James. James was the gray man. His eyes were wide, bulging, and empty. There was a shuffle at his feet. Greg looked down and doubled over with nausea. What was left of a brown-haired young woman lay on the ground. Her throat had been torn out, her head folded back unpleasantly, unspooled muscles and tendons splayed like streamers. A creature buried itself in her chest. In a gruesome second, Greg recognized the thing as the steel-wool hamster, now the size of a Rottweiler. Its metal fur curled menacingly like a tangle of barbed wire. It jerked upwards, turned its large face towards Greg. Its putty yellow eyes glowed with malice. It clutched a hunk of red meat between jagged teeth. With a turn of his stomach, Greg realized the chunk of flesh was the dead girl's heart. The creature tossed its head, swallowing the heart whole. Then, it redirected its rabid attentions towards Greg. It lunged. Greg, in a fit of survival instinct, grabbed his earbuds and forced them into his ears. James's reality-altering EDM creation was blocked out by DMX. The steel-wool monster gnashed its teeth angrily, pressed up against an invisible force field, restrained like a dog on a chain. Greg turned up the volume on his iPod. He knew he didn't have much time. Avoiding the living spikes, he found his way to James's computer. He tore wires, slammed the laptop against the wall, kicked and stomped and smashed the expensive soundboard until it was reduced to a shattered hunk of plastic and rubber and metal. Finally, he pulled out his earphones. He returned to James's room. The air smelled like pennies, with an underscent of sulfur. The girl's destroyed body rested in a pool of blood and entrails. And of course, there was James. James lay on his back, bloodshot eyes wide and unblinking. As Greg stood over him, he barely seemed to breathe, his chest contracting weakly under a pit-stained tank top. Greg saw a new marking on his arm, a long, blue-gray bruise. Like the hickey on the back of his neck, it caught the light like rusting metal. His lips moved. He forced out words. 995. More. Greg fled the apartment. He banged on a neighbor's door, called the police. The cops arrived to find the young woman, dead, on the bedroom floor. James had disappeared. The Bushwick concert, that wasn't the first, Greg insisted. There've been others, in South America. Ibiza. He keeps moving. Keeps changing his name. He never allows himself to get too popular. It's always small shows, 30 people or less. Because if he were some big celebrity, he'd attract too much attention. Yeah. Fame would be anathema to a creature like DJ Eric Zan. Best to chip away slowly, a couple dozen Doom fans at a time. What did it mean? I asked Greg. The last thing he said to you. 995 more. Greg met my eyes. He knew. He knew I knew. That girl, he said. Her name was Devon Slade. She'd been an art student, recently aged out of foster care. And she wasn't his first, either. What composure remained on Greg's face broke down. 4 other girls went missing, around the same time. Over the next few years the police found all of them, buried in shallow graves on opposite ends of the county. They never connected the dead girls back to James, not officially. But, well, I did. Because they'd been mauled. Their hearts torn out of their chests. Greg's story ended there. Mine didn't. That night, at the P*************, I'd killed the music. DJ Eric Zan's black automaton roadies melted into gelatinous black puddles. Heart stuck in my throat, stomach in knots, I eased over to a puddle. I extended a toe. Bump, bump, bump. The bass started up again. The puddles bubbled in time with the music. Gummy arms popped out of the mess, pressed against the ground, formed torsos. I said, no entry until 10. I whirled, away from the re-emerging humanoids and towards that grating, robotic, alien voice. My pulse pounded in my ears. Beads of perspiration formed on my palms and the back of my neck. My neurons rejected my eyes, and I couldn't breathe. James Hadley, DJ Eric Zan, stood in front of me, shirtless and barefaced. His flesh, if you could call it flesh, alternated between metallic blue-black patches that refracted light and rotting dark green tissue that sloughed, hanging off him, dripping foul-smelling liquid. Bits of his arms had disintegrated, revealing silver-stained muscle. He had no nose and no lips and no teeth, just gaping black holes. He was bald, black mold extended across his scalp. His bulging eyes, cloudy white, stood out in bas-relief, and, though I couldn't see pupils, I felt fury laser-focused on me. Footsteps, behind me. His black putty roadies had stabilized, and they'd blocked all the exits. What saved my life that night was a combination of luck and the venue owner's carelessness. I'd bartended many events there, so I knew, behind the stage, a secret trapdoor and hidden staircase lead to the basement. I knew the basement was accessible via another staircase that opened, through cellar doors, to the street. And I knew the owners constantly forgot to lock said cellar doors. I ran, then walked, then collapsed into a heap and cried. Then ran again, walked, cried, rinse and repeat, until I sank onto a bench along Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights, legs too numb to move. I should have, I realized then, called the police. The police would have thought I was high, I told myself. And even if they believed me, it wouldn't have made any difference. 29 people died at the concert. The youngest was 19, the oldest, 51. They were students, baristas, poets, stockbrokers, teachers, biologists, taxi drivers, spouses, and parents. Music lovers who'd only wanted to lose themselves for a night. Their loved ones were told they'd all died in an electrical fire due to rats biting through the wires. The press, outside of a few local outfits, didn't pay the incident as much attention as I thought it deserved. Who cares about a few dead hipsters, right? But many people, family and friends, reporters, low-ranking cops and paramedics who'd seen the aftermath weren't satisfied with the answers they were given. And, as often happens when answers are scarce and higher-ups shut down, certain individuals started asking questions a little louder. For instance, if all 29 victims died in a fire, why had autopsies revealed no smoke in their lungs? Why were the bodies they recovered in pieces? How had an electrical fire torn limbs from sockets with the force of an elephant, or bitten into chests with jaws as wide as a shark's? Why was every single recovered torso missing its heart? And, as a frustrated investigator asked, while showing me a photograph I'm sure he wasn't supposed to reveal, what was the meaning of the words written on the wall? I stared at the words, scrawled in jagged letters, as though by the nails of a broken and bleeding hand. 5 more. My mom's acting strange, and I think it has something to do with the new mirror. The first incident occurred a week ago, 3 days after the mirror arrived. I woke up at 7:30 in the morning to a chilling cold, so disabling I could barely get out of bed. You might think that's just me being a dramatic teenager, but it was a cold like I'd never experienced before. It cut through the skin. I visited cousins in Norway on Christmas holidays that were warmer. My first thought was that the central heating hadn't been turned on, which was strange in itself considering that's the first thing my mom does in the morning. She wakes up each day at 6 on the dot, so when I get up an hour and a half later the house is usually nice and toasty. I don't expect her to do these things like some spoiled brat, if that's what you're thinking. She just does them because she's a considerate mother. Anyway, I assumed she had either slept through her alarm or that, for whatever reason, it had failed to go off. Jane Harris isn't exactly the type of person to sleep through an alarm, so I decided it must be the latter. Once I'd plucked up enough courage to confront the piercing cold, I headed for her bedroom. In the corridor, the wood flooring felt like ice beneath my bare feet, and I instantly regretted not putting my slippers on. Her door was closed when I reached it, which was odd because she usually keeps it slightly ajar for the cat to go in and out throughout the night. I put my ear to the solid wood but heard nothing. I knocked twice. No answer. I knocked again, the added force stinging my knuckles. Again, no answer. At this point I was quite worried, and a vicious image suddenly entered my mind of my mother in some type of danger. Hastily, I opened the door. However, when I entered the room, I saw that she wasn't in danger at all. In fact, she wasn't even asleep. She was sat in her chair, fully dressed, looking into the mirror. "Is everything okay, Mum?" I asked. At first she didn't notice me, but after a few seconds she caught my reflection and smiled. "Hello, darling," she said. I flinched. There was something about her voice. Something that sounded off. I could feel my guts suddenly churn, and the sensation of a deep pit opening in my chest overwhelmed me. Inhaling deeply, I tried to gather myself. And then it hit me. I'd heard that voice before. It must be the cold, I quickly realized, shaking my head. God knows how long Mom had been sitting there wearing only her work clothes. She had probably caught the flu or something. "Are you okay?" I asked again. She didn't answer. "Mom?" I caught the hint of a frown in her mirror's reflection, so I called out to her again, and this time she turned around to face me. For a moment it was like looking into the eyes of a stranger, and then she sprang to life. "Sorry," she said, color suddenly rushing into her face. Something must have come over me. She pulled herself up from her chair, looked around the room and frowned. "Gosh, isn't it cold in here?" she remarked. "The second incident happened yesterday. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee, accosted by the same violent cold. On my way to the bathroom, with my slippers on this time, I heard a noise from the end of the corridor. It was coming from my mom's room. Curious, I detoured towards the noise, my ears alert. It was dark in the corridor, so I tried flicking the table lamp on and almost knocked a framed picture off the wall. It was my parents' old wedding photo, the only image of Dad Mom refuses to take down. I turned on the lamp, readjusted the picture, and continued moving. I reached the end of the corridor and perked my head around the corner. Again, Mom's door was closed, but I gathered she was awake from the thin glow beneath her door. And from the noises. They were louder now, and they were coming from her room. I crept silently forward, edging towards the door, turning my head to listen. It was a cry. Someone was in her room crying. A chill ran down my spine like a bolt. I wanted to run away, but my body propelled me forward, my hand reaching for the doorknob and twisting. I flung myself into her room. The cold was like a tundra. My mom was sitting in front of the mirror, staring into her reflection, her nightie barely covering her thin shoulders. Her body was still, but her mouth was open, and a deep cry, a man's cry, flooded out of it. A cry I'd heard before, but not from her lips. I screamed. I ran over to my mom and shook her. She remained still, completely unaware of my presence, her eyes hooked to the pair in the mirror. I reached beneath her arms and pulled her from the chair. Her body felt like the heaviest object in the world, and it took every inch of my strength to lift her. We both went crashing to the floor. The crying ceased. "What the actual fuck, Mom?" I said to her, still shaking. I helped her up off the floor, barely able to lift myself. Her face looked gaunt and frayed. "We need to get rid of that mirror," I told her. She turned to face me, her eyes like hollowed shells. "Your dad wouldn't like that," she said. And that's when I freaked out. My dad's been missing for almost 2 years. As soon as she said that, I left. I'm at my friend's house right now. I don't know how long I can stay here, but at some point, I need to return home. I don't know what to do.